All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Tellor Tech Talk. Um, Date April 21st, 2020. Today I'm going to go over the Tellor V2 improvements. Hopefully it gives you guys a good feel for what we're planning on doing and kind of why we picked some of these updates. First, just kind of quick announcements. Um, the obvious one tomorrow is the auto public call. We've been posting that, Alliance of Decentralized Oracles. Make sure you guys tune in for that. Come ask some questions. Should just be a good time. Find out about some of the other Oracle projects and how we're hoping to kind of collaborate to make the whole space a little bit better. Second piece, next Friday, DeFi discussions. It's an event that I'm speaking at. I think I'm speaking 9 p.m. on Friday night, Eastern time. Hopefully you guys can make it and watch it. It should be, I get 20 minutes and 10 minutes of questions, and there's a bunch of other good speakers. I think it goes us, and then a few of the other, we're like in the Oracle section. So you can listen to our talk on Oracles and then listen to some of the other people's talks on Oracles. So that should be good. And just, I wanted to put kind of a PSA out there for miners. I'll be posting this kind of on Discord later too, but if you guys have noticed, we've had a few disputes over the past few weeks. Just be careful out there if you're running your own miner. I know a lot of people have sort of written custom miners, or even if you're running the Tellor miner, just be careful about what you're submitting. So people have been submitting bad values on chain, and they've been getting disputed, and they get their stake slashed. This is obviously not what we want to happen. We want everybody to sort of be posting good values, and once you guys are disputed, unless I'm the person that can dispute you, there's nothing I can do to give you your tokens back if it's a bad value. So make sure you're just running either the official miner, or you really kind of work with me and work with the team to do your due diligence. And that you're also just checking the values. Check them both when you submit or before you submit, and then even after you submit. If you dispute yourself, you take the value off chain, and there's not really a penalty there for you, just some gas. So that can also be an option for you guys. But definitely, because some of the bad values that we've been seeing, it's not like you're posting, if the Ethereum price is 170, you're saying it's 168. Usually what happens is, like, the Ethereum price is 170 and the person is posting 10 million, and it's just their system broke. So don't do that. Reach out to me if you guys need help kind of building that stuff, and we're doing some PSR upgrades probably over the next month. So a lot of that stuff's going to be changing. So if you don't want to get disputed, make sure you're either using the official Tellor miner for your database, or you're really staying on top of this stuff. Anyway, enough for that. Now on to the Tellor V2. So Tellor V2, just to give you guys a timeline and just the overall structure of what we're doing. For the timeline, we think we can take this one a little bit slower, since there's a lot of upgrades kind of going in place. Ideally, we'd be kind of building it over the next month or two, sending it out for an audit, testing it for a month, and then deploying it. So, my goal would be like, sometime Q3, late Q2 kind of deployment. So this isn't something that's going to be, done over the next month. But it's also not a 2-year-long research project. We pick things that we know that we can do, and then we know that we can implement. And if you want to help us implement them in the code, we'd be happy to kind of talk to you if you're a Solidity developer. The main goals, so as we're going through this, remember, it's proposed, so nothing is sort of, we obviously haven't tested it, so nothing is set in concrete. And the other thing, looking at, we've been talking to a bunch of projects in the space, and we want to get over that hurdle of what is sort of their limits to why aren't they using Tellor? What are their hesitations? And this isn't like a pivot to allow vastly different amounts of data. You know, the big thing that's still needed in the space is basically just simple price feeds, and we're doubling down on that. You know, we want to be able to serve these people, and you know, the big things that we need to do are increase our security. Obviously, a lot of that just comes with time. You know, trusting a protocol that's 6 months old is hard. So just the longer we've been alive, it's going to help. And some of these other changes will also add security. And B, people want just a little bit more liveness guarantee in kind of the speed. So, you know, the 10-minute block times are pretty slow, but you could theoretically go a long time without a price update on some of those. So making sure that we can sort of provide those values is what we're really trying to do. So with that, feel free to ask any questions in the chat, but also anytime. The first upgrade, so I am, if you go to Medium, Tellor V2 article, I'm walking through it piece by piece. The first one is increase the number of data points per block. So if you guys know how it works now, Tellor has 5 miners. So, you know, we have miners 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they all submit pricing on chain, and then we take the median as the official value. There's just no reason though that we couldn't take more than one value. So right now, you know, we take the highest request ID, and let's say it's ID 1 is the most tipped. That one will be included. What we want to do now is we're going to take the top, right now proposed is 5. So the top 5 price ID. So now instead of just submitting the Bitcoin price, that you're going to submit the Bitcoin price, the Ethereum price, the TRB price, the price of oil, the price of the S&P, whatever the top 5 requested ones are. This means obviously that we've just 5x'd the throughput in our network. And yeah, it should be really powerful, because now, you know, you're not only, you don't need to tip to become the top ID every single time. You can just tip to become, you know, one of the top 5. So if somebody wanted to spam our network by just tipping a whole lot and not letting any of the other IDs get through, that would be a lot more expensive now. So the kind of the considerations that we have to think about doing this. The big consideration is going to be gas costs. So as you guys know, the gas costs for the final transaction on Tellor that calculates the median and transfers the tokens, that's already pretty high. But now you have to sort through and get the median of 5 different arrays, 5 different values. It's going to be even more expensive. Obviously, one way that we're going to be handling that is we're going to be sort of splitting it up. So like some of the token transfers are going to occur through each of the 5 miners. We're going to more equitably distribute the gas costs, which should definitely help. But still, there's going to be some heavy gas costs. So we might rely on some solidity magic, and hopefully whenever, you know, ETH 2.0 launches, things can get sort of drastically cheaper. So, because that's one thing. And, you know, I think with the next piece, you really just have to really balance the gas cost versus the reward. And it's something that you have to pay attention to. So I think that's going to be our biggest challenge with adding the arrays. Other than that, it should be relatively simple. The other piece that you want to do is, you know, your next question, obviously, if gas costs can be handled, is, okay, well, why don't you just have an array of all 50 prices and you're just pushing it every time? Well, the problem there is that then you have 0 scarcity in your token. You know, if every price can be included in the array, then you have no scarcity, and you lose that demand. So you have to have some scarcity to sort of create that demand, and that's what you're kind of building out here. So yeah, so that's the array. That one is, you know, I'm definitely excited about. The next one, which, you know, probably gets a little bit more press than the previous one, but doesn't do nearly as much, as increasing the speed. So right now we have 10-minute block times. We can reduce the 10-minute block times. You could just say 5-minute block times. It's pretty simple change. The things that you sort of have to balance here. So it's the inflation rate. So you would have to, if let's say you cut it from 10 minutes to 5 minutes. So you just cut it in half. You'd also have to cut the reward in half. So the mining reward, in order to keep the inflation rate the same, you would now be making half as much. That's also fine. But like I said, if you're going to go, let's say you wanted to go down to 2-minute block times, now you could actually see some issues, because if you go down to 2-minute block times, now you're cutting the reward by 1/5. So if you cut the reward by 1/5 and you increase the gas cost, you could theoretically have a situation where the reward is less than the gas cost. So people aren't going to be wanting to push it to the network unless you like tip it more, which could be an issue. So we want to make sure that we sort of balance that. And some of the other issues are, like whenever you don't need to be too fast, like you can reduce it even more, but there's times of network stress on Ethereum, as we all saw with like Black Thursday. Sometimes just getting a value through can take 10 minutes, can take an hour per transaction. And you want to build systems that can sort of handle that. So, the necessity, I almost like increasing the availability of Tellor by increasing, the number of blocks in the array better than lowering the speed. Yeah, Banteg just said that too. I like, I think we can reduce some of the block times, maybe like a 5-minute block time. But we'll just be playing around with it. I think how the testing sort of goes is going to be a big piece of that. Maybe if like ETH 2.0 launches and you have, instant finality with things, and maybe it's for a different discussion. But yeah, I think we're going to err on increasing it through just having larger arrays, but we can likely see a small reduction in the speed as well. So that's also one. So limiting rewards per miner. So this one's fun for all of you miners. So we pose ourselves as a decentralized oracle, so you sort of need decentralization, especially in your miners. Now, one of the issues is that as we sort of develop as a network, we've seen just more and more pools come on board. So the number of miners has actually been falling in our network because it's less and less individuals and more pools, it seems. So everybody, you have most of the hash power underneath just 3,000 or 4,000 tokens staked. This isn't necessarily the best thing. You want to make sure that miners they have, if you're controlling a large portion of the validity of the values, you have a large amount sort of invested in this network. So one of the things that we can do is limit the rewards per staked address. So what you could say is, like right now, each of these miners has to have 1K token staked. So 1,000. What you can say is that, okay, he has 1,000, but he's only allowed to do it for once every 30 minutes, you could say. And so if it's once every 30 minutes, now you would need, if you wanted to win 2 times in those 30 minutes, you'd need to stake 2,000 tokens. And that way, if you're winning every single block, you would actually need to stake a whole lot more tokens. And that way, it sort of corresponds to how sort of influential you are in the proof of work network. So what those exact values are going to be, we don't want to limit the number of miners in the system, but at the same point, you want to make sure that in the end, we don't have a system where you have 2 pools with 1,000 tokens each staked, and everybody's just submitting all the values through them, or 5,000 tokens staked, for instance, would be like the minimum. That's not a good system. You want to make sure that there are chances for other people to come on board, and if you're really that dominant in in the proof of work space, you have to put up more stake for it. Happy to kind of talk that one over too, for ideas. And the other one, okay, so now we're getting into some fun crypto economics ones. So the security one, no time limits on disputes. Okay, so right now the way that we have it is, so this median value for 1 day, you have 1 day that you can dispute it, and then it's sort of locked, and then you can't take it off. This is sort of pointless. We've realized there's, no one's really waiting a day to read it. So they're just assuming the way that it works is you assume that somebody checked it within the first 10 minutes, or, similar to like, we're just going to remove the 1 day thing. So there is no sort of finality on these values, that they can always sort of be taken down. And I think this just puts the onus on the user. And that's what we want to instill, is that whenever similar to like with Bitcoin. So with Bitcoin, you have all these transactions, and like Coinbase, for instance, they require 6 confirmations, and after 6 confirmations, then they say that it went through, because you would assume that the chain is finalized at that moment, and that's what we want here. So if you're comfortable saying, hey, after 1 minute the value looks good, we'll accept it, then use it at 1 minute. If you're a more cautious individual, you want an hour to review, do it. You want a day to review, that's up to the users. We don't want to have something in there that says you should be using a day, you should be using an hour. Because ultimately, if one of these protocols is running on Tellor, the setup that we want to give them is, say just some JavaScript scraper that looks at the prices and compares it to their own database. And if the price is wrong, they dispute it. It should be relatively instant, these disputes. So, they should know, like, as long as they're running and checking disputes on the system, they know that a bad value is never going to get through in, after 10 minutes worth of time or 5 minutes worth of time. So we want to sort of move, this is just more of one of those where the incentive lies, and it makes it easier in the code if there's no finalized value. So obviously the caveat here is, so miners have 7-day lock periods. So once a miner requests a withdrawal, he has to wait 7 days. So if you dispute somebody that's a value that's over 7 days old, you don't necessarily get any reward for it, because the miner could already be gone with his tokens. But that does, it still allows us to go back and clean up old values, if there is a problem. So, but like we said, mainly it's just to sort of get away from the image problem there. All right, moving on. Multiple round disputes. Multiple round disputes. Yeah. By the way, I'm reading comments. Artem said, pro tip, self-dispute if you notice before others. That's actually, I don't know if you were here for at the beginning of the thing. I said, self-dispute, like monitor your things and self-dispute yourselves. If you see yourself submit a bad value, just dispute yourself. Yeah, you lock your tokens, but you don't lose them. You're just locking your tokens and removing the bad value. So that would be ideal, if you're an honest miner. So yeah, try and get all your miner buddies to listen to this. Anyway, multiple round disputes. So right now, the way that our voting works, let's say, so, you have a dispute, and then what happens is it goes to a 7-day vote. And on the 7-day vote, it's token weighted. If everybody says, hey, it was a bad value, the miner's stake goes to the person who initiated the dispute. If the vote says, no, that wasn't a bad value, then the miner gets that dispute fee, and yeah, the person loses that dispute fee and the miner's restaked. The problem with this is kind of with all governance systems is that now you're relying on governance. Voting in the Tellor system is not the best. We know that we need to build some more tools for this, and we'd be happy, we'd love some people to help us doing this, just front ends to make it easier to vote. But yeah, so the problem is, you could have somebody wait until the last block. So this has happened in several other systems, most notably Aragon, where it was a proposal, should we do this or not? And then right at the last moment, a giant whale comes in and shifts the whole vote. So it would be like, if it's passing, the team votes, hey, this was a bad value. But then the miner goes and he gets all of his buddies, and then at the last minute tanks it and gets the bad value pushed through. That's bad. But then there's nothing we can actually do about it in our current system. We just have to sort of rally everybody during that thing. So what the proposal is that you can dispute the dispute. So what this allows us to do is, what we're going to move to is, so now you're going to dispute it and you have a 1-day vote. 1-day vote, and it's going to cost less. So now let's say, it's going to be dependent on the number of miners, but let's say it costs 10 TRB to initiate the dispute, and there's a 1-day vote. If the 1-day vote goes well, so now you don't even have to wait 7 days. Miners probably like this. Same with the disputer. 1-day vote. If that one works, the slashing procedure goes on as planned. If it doesn't work, though, somebody can dispute the dispute. So they can pay now double that, so 20 TRB, and they'll initiate a 2-day vote. And during the 2-day vote, hopefully people will see that there was a failed vote here. So, we'll go rally the troops on Telegram and try and get every miner to vote and, maintain the integrity of the system. If that one also fails, the attacker is very, very well coordinated. You can kick it off to a 4-day vote, which will cost you 40 TRB. And you see it doubles every time. You get the idea. But there's no limit to it. So you can just, I guess theoretically it could go up to like the supply of Tellor. Yes, this is, somebody said, reminds me of the forking universe in Augur V1. So there's no fork, but this was very inspired by Augur, actually just sort of removing the finality in there even farther. And we like that. Obviously for people, if they needed a value, you would just hopefully request it again. So you would just move on and say, if you need the ETH US dollar price, you request it again. That would be, and then you get it 5 minutes later in the V2. So you wouldn't have to wait through all of the disputes, but it sort of maintains the integrity of the system. And now, the voting period is much shorter, which people should like. Hopefully the dispute amount is much shorter, which people should like. Should just make it easier for everyone. So yeah, we like that change. That's kind of a unanimous one, I think, but happy to hear arguments against it. The next one, sort of more on the general code improvements, but for some reason is in the security section. Allow tips of the current ID being mined. So right now, let's say you have request ID 1 being mined with a total tip of, 1 TRB. Let's say gas prices shoot up to 500 GWay to get something pushed through. So it'll cost you $100 to push this transaction through. Obviously for 1 TRB, no miner is going to pay that gas fee. But let's say you're some derivatives DApp and you really want it through to settle your derivative. Now we want you to be able to actually you can up that tip right there. So like you can pay, $100 with a TRB, put it on there, and now a miner will push it through because now it's worth it. So that's just, now you can cover the gas costs in some of those crazy times. And that was sort of inspired by some of the liveness issues with the other ones, because some of the other oracles, the problem is that with most oracles, like ours is actually a lot better because at least we have this competition where you at least want to be first to get any reward. But there's no liveness guarantees in the other ones. So if you're like doing a proof of stake thing, or you're just have a centralized data reporter, what what incentive do you have to pay that $500 gas fee? None. And what incentive does the project have? You know, if the project who really wants it, how can they push it through themselves? They actually can't push it through themselves on these centralized systems. They're just sort of stuck. You know, maybe they could reach out to you and say like, hey, push it, like pay whatever gas is necessary and we'll pay you. But that's like not ideal in the decentralized world. You want to sort of be able to do it on chain, and this is what it allows. Yeah, so those are our kind of security upgrades. The next ones, we have some general code improvements. I think we already talked about evening out some of the transaction costs. Hopefully that'll be good. I think there's some other ways. We're just going to kind of clean up some of the code. We've recognized some other ways that we can save on some gas costs. So yeah, that should be better. You know, upgrading, there's some cool things you can do with some new Solidity versions. I don't need to get too into that. And then, yeah, that should sort of be some of the other ones. Another one is the difficulty adjustment. So this one we've known about for a while. We're kind of debating how best to handle it, but with the difficulty adjustment, you can, if a block, let's say nobody just requests data for an hour. Now it looks like there's an hour in between data blocks. So the difficulty adjusts, even though, you know, the difficulty shouldn't adjust, there just wasn't any tip. So we'll be fixing that one. Hopefully it should just stabilize some of the block times. Not that we've had an issue with that too much since kind of the early mining days. Now some fun ones. This one, so we're actually planning on removing request data. So the function in a whole. So right now, and I wish I had more room on my whiteboard because I don't think I have an eraser. Anyway, right now the way that it works is we have what are called PSRs for the first 50 IDs, which are all specified off chain. So you have, you know, we have a big list on GitHub of how we map them to certain APIs, and that's specified off chain. In addition to doing that, you can also go request. So you can load an API on chain, and the miners will pull it from the chain and go mine it and give you a value for it. We're actually going to get rid of that. Users don't want these. From talking to users, they don't really want these generalized API query machines. You know, they need a specific price feed on chain. They know what it is. They can specify it, and it needs to be more robust than a single API. And that's what we're moving to. So everything is just going to be off chain. So we're going to have all of the request IDs just stored off chain. And then the values are just going to be handled on chain, but what those values are, in order to look, you're not going to be able to look on chain. You're going to have to look off chain. This makes Tellor a little bit more flexible, and we're also just because we're handling more and more things. So we're going to be the things that people need in the space. You know, like I come from more of the traditional finance world a little bit, and you have a lot of projects in the space just don't understand the idea of like what a good settlement price is. So, you know, just the idea that you probably shouldn't be using the last traded price to settle your derivatives contract. That's a problem. So we're going to be doing things, you know, volume and time weighted averages. We're going to be doing things like manually inputted data. So we're going to actually have the miners once a week, once a month, maybe you go and update a text file, like, you know, manually inputs things. You can also have, you know, a lot more of those APIs and those medians for calculating things. And, you know, because ultimately, I think we've talked about it a little bit. What we want to do is move to having the ability for Tellor to sort of move to like a peer-to-peer model too, where you can like pass data back and forth between nodes even, so APIs can't censor you. Because the general idea is that, you know, we want ID1 is an ETH US dollar price. it's going to be an ETH US dollar price. You know, we don't even care where you get it from. We want people to post an ETH US dollar price, and we want it to be sort of completely censorship resistant. So even if Coinbase shuts down their API, Binance shuts down their API, we can still get an ETH US dollar price on chain. And that's what's going to really sort of differentiate ourselves. So I don't think that really is going to affect anyone, but it's just kind of how we talk about Tellor and moving forward. You know, it's going to look a little bit different. You know, it's not this thing where you can just plug in some random API and go query it. You know, nobody really wants that. What they want is a reliable price feed that's actually usable in DeFi at the moment. Okay, and the last but not least. So this one's fun, which is the token fee burning. So this has been proposed in the ETH monetary policy as well, but it's basically what we call the commoditization of the underlying asset. So basically, it's a way for the supply to actually be used up, because TRB, there isn't really any scarcity if it just continues to be recycled through the system. So the general idea is that now, whenever somebody tips, so let's say they tip to TRB, half of it is going to be burned. So it's just half of it's gonna go to the miner as the tip, and the other half's gonna be burned. And this actually creates scarcity going forward. So similar to like oil, very topical. Whenever it's consumed, you can't use it again. So, you know, that's always been the problem with these sort of recyclable cryptocurrencies like ETH. Even you pay a transaction fee and then it just goes right back into circulation. You actually don't even need that much of it. There's not really any scarcity besides just the people holding. You know, if velocity really goes up and people aren't holding it, the price will actually tank as people are using it more. So, you know, that's actually a problem. You want, whenever you use the underlying commodity, for it to actually be used up in some sense. And that's what we're planning with Tellor. So it should create a lot more scarcity in the token once tips start taking off. And yeah, I think there's a lot of support within the community for these kind of things. I think even within the Ethereum community, there's a lot of support for it. Curious to see where that one goes. So yeah, that's about it for Tellor V2. You know, kind of as we said, the real focus is just on doubling down on what we've already been doing, providing these stable price feeds. And I think, you know, talking to projects about what they need, it is these specific, you know, robust APIs and robust settlement prices, and then using our structure. We provide the liveness guarantee, and we provide the actual decentralization, so that, yeah, you know, if they're actually building their project correctly, where you don't need these instantaneous values, you can sort of just use Tellor and then forget about it. So that's about it. Any questions before we log off? But thanks everyone for logging on. You know, I know V2 talk isn't as much fun as an AMA, but yeah, and if you guys have any other V2 proposals as well, you know, we were thinking about some of the other ones we had were just upgrading, like moving to more bytes values so you can return more arbitrary strings. That one might get a little bit more complicated. You know, maybe down the line, especially whenever you're talking about the need for bridging chains, that one can be important. But we honestly don't even see a huge need for that right now. So yeah, depending, that was one that we sort of threw out just for sake of simplicity. And then some of the other pieces, yeah, I'm trying to think what else we sort of threw out in the Tellor V2 upgrades. There are definitely things kind of on our roadmap, especially, you know, we were talking about things such as for governance, whether it's delegating votes. That was one that's sort of hot. And how do you sort of make the governance process go more smoothly? You know, we want, you know, how do you incentivize governance through the policies on chain? And I think that's something that, you know, we didn't really address here. So we addressed it with the multiple rounds of voting, which definitely helps a lot. but we want every token holder of Tellor to be playing a role and be playing a part. We want you guys, and a lot of it just comes from building a good community, which we feel like we've done. But what specific pieces in the code can we actually change to make sure that we get a better community? You can talk about things such as mandatory voting. You can, other people have talked about even just cost to hold. So people are actually paying to hold your token. There's a lot of these things, but how can you sort of make Tellor more successful in the long run by doing these things, even if it, scares speculators away in the short term? Those are some of the things that we want to think about moving long term, just to make it a success, especially as we kind of decentralize ourselves. So I guess there's no question. So thanks everyone for coming, and yeah, talk to you guys next week for a normal community call. So, and see you guys all tomorrow at the auto call. Good questions are welcome. So see you everyone.